going on in your prayers. So we are in the book of Hebrews. If you've got your Bibles with you, open them up over to Hebrews. We are in the 11th chapter. We've been working our way through the 11th chapter, the Faith Hall of Fame. Real quick, we'll wrap up on where we're at with Hebrews. This is a letter that's written to these Jewish Christians who are thinking about turning back to their old ways of going back to the law, back to Judaism. And the author of Hebrews is taking his time in explaining to them why they don't need to do that. He has talked about the first 8 verses, how Jesus is greater and he is completely sufficient for everything that they need. They don't need that old law. Chapter 9, he talked about the separation from the old to the new. And then chapter 10, he talked about the sacrifices that were made under the old versus the one final sacrifice that was made with Jesus Christ under the new. And in chapter 11, we've been in here for the last few weeks, and we'll be in here for a couple more yet, the Faith Hall of Fame, where faith is really the key. Believing in what God has promised and taking that promise to the bank. That is what chapter 11 is all about. And we left off last week over in the 10th verse and talking about this new heavenly country and this new city that he is preparing for those who have faith in him. And now he's going to transition back and start talking about more individuals and the faith that they have. So we're going to pick up over in the 11th chapter, right where we left off last week. We're going to start in, let me get over here where I'm right. I'm in the wrong chapter. I'm in the whole wrong chapter where I'm at here. So we're going to start in the 11th chapter. We're going to start down in the, that's wrong. We're going to start down in the 17th verse. That's from last week. Somebody forgot to change that. I hope I got this week's PowerPoint in here. If I don't, y'all are going to be really on to last week. No, it is. I see my next one coming up. We're going to start reading in verse 17. Verse 17, chapter 11, verse 17. And we're actually just going to read through verse 22, so we're not taking a big bite tonight. But there is a lot going on in what we're going to read tonight. So, starting in verse 17 of Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each one of his sons, Joseph, each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. So it's just a short little passage that we're looking at tonight. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. He's going through these individuals, and it's really the lineage of Abraham that he's going through here. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. His Abraham the father, then his son, then his grandson, then his great-grandson. And he's going to talk about their faith, and we're going to look at that. So the very beginning of it, Hebrews 11:17, he says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. So this is one of the greatest tests of faith that is found in the Bible. I mean, when you go through the Bible, there's a lot of tests of faith in there. This is one of the greatest ones that we find in there. It's one of the most well-known tests of faith. When Abraham is told to take his son Isaac up on the mountain and offer him as a living sacrifice, or as a sacrifice to God by actually killing his son. That's basically what he is called to do. So here's the thing that we need to look at in the very beginning of this, because it says, by faith Abraham, when he was tested. Number one, this was a test, not a temptation. And we know that because the author of Hebrews tells us when he was tested. What is the difference between a test and a temptation? When you're tested, are you not tempted? When you're tempted, are you not being tested? What are you laughing at, Greg? We're not being tempted by God. Now, God led Abraham up on this mountain to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, right? Was God tempting Abraham or testing him? Well, God can't tempt, so he's testing him. Here's the difference. Look over to James chapter 1. Go over to James chapter 1. We're going to start in the 12th verse. James chapter 1, starting in verse 12. And James talks about this very thing. He's talking about temptation. He's talking about how to deal with temptation. James is one of the most practical books in the Bible. He hits everyday things, talking about how to deal with them. And in this passage, he's talking about temptation. And in James chapter 1, starting verse 12, he said, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death." So, here's the thing. God can't tempt. Where does temptation come from? Well, it comes from the devil, but it starts right here, doesn't it? It starts right here. He says when he's enticed by his own desires and his own wants. Our own desires and our own wants are what is where the temptation comes in at. Look back in your Bibles, back to the book of Genesis, and keep your page marker in Hebrews, but you can probably keep your finger back in Genesis too, because we're going to be going back to Genesis quite a bit tonight. Genesis chapter 3, starting in the first verse. We just read this here within the last week or so, but we're going to read it again because we're talking about temptation, we're talking about testing. And we see them both happening in the Garden of Eden at the very beginning. Genesis chapter 3. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest ye die." Then the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband who was with her, and he ate. So we just read this passage Sunday morning. But temptation comes from our own desires. Now, here's the thing. When you think about it, that temptation was from their own desires. Now, the test was, you can eat anything in this garden except that. Was he not giving them a test? There was a test right off the bat. He's God. If God wanted to, he could have planted that garden and not put the tree of good and evil in the middle of the garden. He could have just removed the whole thing. But it was placed there. And here is a test. You are mine, you're my creation. And here's the test. I'm going to give you something to do. And I'm going to see if you do it or not. Did they fail the test? They failed the test. God was not tempting them to do something wrong. What God was saying was, here is what I want you to do, and I expect you to be obedient to that, and let's see if you can be obedient to that. Now, who comes along? Satan. Satan comes along, and he starts twisting things around, and when Eve looks at the tree, what happens? When the woman saw, it was pleasing to the eye. Up until that point, I don't think they'd even paid any attention to it. Because God said no, and they said okay. But then Satan came along and said, man, did he really say that? And you know what's interesting about this? When you go back and you look at the account, which we did last Sunday, he gave that command to Adam. He didn't give it to Eve, and he never said anything about touching it. You see what happens whenever Satan starts messing with your mind? You start messing up even God's word. Because Eve comes out and says, no, we can't eat of that. We can't even touch it or we'll die. God didn't say that. The only command he said was, don't eat it. Eve said, well, we can't eat it. We can't touch it. And Satan said, oh yeah, you'll know. Now we've got, she saw it. It was pleasant to the eye. It was desirable. Takes us right back to what James said. Temptation comes whenever we see and have our own desires and our own wants. So God's testing Abraham. He's not tempting Abraham. He's testing Abraham. So number one, Abraham was tested by God, not tempted. Yes, sir. That's exactly right.
It gives Satan the opportunity to rationalize. And the more you listen to, the more you talk to him, the more, I mean, his whole purpose is to test us, to tempt us, and try to get us to do things that are wrong.
To tempt us to fail the test.
So,
Yeah.
in my prayers, I ask, please help me to recognize the temptation for what it is,
Yeah.
and not give in to that.
Yeah. It's the old saying, you got to nip it in the bud.
Chance to
Yeah.
have a conversation.
Yeah. And I think that's where so many people fall, is they want to have the conversation. They want to, you know, I'm not going to do it, but if I did, well, man, you know, just get away from it. It's like you said, the downfall was her even talking to Satan in the first place. It should have been right off the bat, get behind me. We're going to go somewhere else in the garden and not even be by the tree. But they carry on this whole conversation right in front of it.
God is not taking the fruit and dangling it in your
No.
faces and saying,
No.
look at you, that's what it is.
No.
Satan is doing it.
Yeah. And you know, the book of Genesis is, how much time has passed since Adam and Eve have been placed in the garden? And then Satan shows up. I don't know. We don't know. Could have been a year, could have been 10 years, could have been 100 years. We don't know. Adam and Eve are in the garden. They've been placed in the garden. Now Satan shows up. Who knows how long they've been there? The tree's there, and they haven't even paid any attention to it because they were told not to, until Satan shows up and says, you should pay attention to this. And then they start looking at it, and then their desires cause the fall. And I'm sure Abraham probably had some desire. Well, I don't think he did. I think when God called him to do this, as a matter of fact, I know he didn't because the way Hebrews reads, when God called him to go offer Isaac, he just does it. He doesn't even question it. He just does it. And the book of Hebrews says he does it. I'm getting ahead of myself now. I need to get back to my PowerPoint. But he just does it because he knows God can bring him back from the dead if I do go through with this. So, number one, Abraham was tested by God, not tempted. Here's the second thing, though. This is just a little something. Where does the author get the idea that Isaac was Abraham's only begotten son? Because the fact is he's not. Abraham's got 8 sons altogether before his life ends. His firstborn is Ishmael. And Ishmael is quite a bit older than Isaac is. So he's already got 1 son. Then after Sarah dies, he remarries and he has 6 more sons with his new wife, Keturah. So he's got 8 sons altogether before his life ends. And at this point in his life, he's got 2. He's got Ishmael and he's got Isaac. But Isaac is the one of the promise. Yes?
Well, mine says that begotten, return for begotten carries a unique or special.
Special.
Yeah, so he was special.
He was special and he was unique because he was the child of the promise. Ishmael was not. Ishmael was, and I may have that on here. Ishmael was Abraham and Sarah's attempt at forcing God's hand. They took it into their own hand because God told them, do what? They thought they were going to help God because God said you're going to have a son, and it didn't happen in 9 months. Didn't happen in a year. Didn't happen in a couple years. And Sarah got tired of it, and she said, hey, Abraham, take my maidservant and give me a child through her. Well, that didn't work out very well. Not for Sarah, not for Hagar, not for Ishmael, not for Abraham. You know, so Ishmael was his son, but he was not the son of promise. He wasn't the unique, special, called out son that God said, I am going to give you. That's the one begotten son. So they were trying to help God. Ishmael came along because of human effort, not because of God's plan. So when Isaac came along, this is the son of the promise, and Abraham gets that. You take your one son, the son of the promise, and you go offer him. So, and it's also foreshadowing what's to come. That's the first time you see that. Take your only begotten son and offer him. What's John 3:16 say? He so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. You know, so it's a foreshadowing. You go back. I'm working on a sermon, and it may wind up being a series on Easter eggs, and I was going to name it Easter eggs in the Old Testament. Y'all know what Easter eggs are in movies? In movies, they call them Easter eggs. If you're watching a movie and they have something in the background or something hidden from another movie and you recognize it, you're like, oh, they got an Easter egg hidden. Disney's great about that. Disney will have a movie and in the background there might be a little balloon or something that has a Mickey Mouse on it. The movie has nothing to do with Mickey Mouse, but you go, oh, there's an Easter egg for Mickey Mouse. I'm working up a series. I think it's going to wind up being a series for almost said and done on Easter eggs in the Old Testament. Everywhere that you see Jesus in the Old Testament, and just stuff like this. Take your only begotten son and sacrifice him. So, then we get over to verse 18. He says, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. So there's the promise. It's just reiterating what we just discussed. He was the son of the promise. He was the special one. He was the one that was going to be called out for this. And then in verse 19, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So, here's the thing. This is what I was talking about a minute ago. Here is where Abraham's real faith really shows. When he's told, you take Isaac up on the mountain and you sacrifice Isaac. And Abraham doesn't even question it. He gets the wood, he gets the fire, he gets Isaac. He puts the wood on Isaac's back and says, we're going to go up on the mountain and we're going to make a sacrifice. And they head up the mountain. He never even questioned it. Why doesn't he question it? Because he knows the God that he serves. And he knows this is what God wants me to do. And I know that if I do what God is telling me to do, God is going to take care of it and it will be all right. And that's that whole passage there, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. If I take Isaac up here, he has made me this promise that Isaac was the son of the promise, that he would be the one that starts this whole thing. If I take him up here and kill him because God has told me to, God will raise him from the dead. He had that much faith. And then it says, which he also received him in a figurative sense. I mean, he did get him back from the dead, basically, didn't he? He had him laying on that altar. He literally had the knife up in the air, ready to plunge it in. Yeah.
Abraham made, when he was told to do this, Abraham made that decision just like that.
Yes.
He didn't think about it. The decision was made decisively.
Yeah. And how many times do we see people in the Bible that God calls to do something and they debate with him about it?
He also said we will be back.
Huh?
He also said we will be back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. When he left and Sarah said, what are you doing? We're going to go up and offer a sacrifice and we will be back. I mean, he knew. Whatever happens up there, God's going to take care of it and he'll give me my son back if it has to go that far. So he didn't question it because he knew God could raise him back from the dead. Look back to Genesis chapter 23. This is where this takes place, and this really shows. I'm going to have to look back there. I didn't put that one. Now I got to go all the way back there because I didn't put it on the board. So, Genesis chapter 23. Genesis chapter 23. I don't think that's right. I think I've got the wrong one in there. 22. It is. That's where I'm at. 22. All right, 22, starting in verse 6 is where we'll go. This is where they're going up the mountain. So Abraham, starting verse 6 of Genesis 22. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the two of them went together. But Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." Then he said, "Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." So the two of them went together. I mean, Abraham knows exactly what God has asked him to do. And Isaac I think he's kind of putting two and two together. He's saying, okay, we're going up the mountain here. Here's the wood, here's the fire. We've got everything for an offering, but we don't have the lamb. And Abraham says, God will provide. I mean, what a great testament of faith that is. You know, God will provide. You was fixing to say something, weren't you?
God will provide the lamb.
Yes.
Not there.
Mm-hmm.
He provided the ram as a sacrifice for this.
Yep.
Jesus was the only true.
That's going to be the true lamb that God is going to supply. Yeah. Easter egg. They're all over the place. That's why I'm saying it's got to be a series. I can't do that in one sermon. That may be 2027's Wednesday nights. I don't know. We'll have to see. But yeah, this faith is unbelievable when you think about it. But then again, you've got a man here who God is speaking to almost face to face. And he has seen God at work. And he doubted God once. I mean, when God said you're going to have a son, and then he went and tried to force his own way, help God out, him and Sarah, when they, did that with Hagar and had Ishmael, God was like, nope, that's not it. Just trust me and do what I say. And Abraham does. So it's a beautiful, beautiful statement of faith. So then in verse 20, it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Now we're going down to the grandkids. We go from Abraham's faith in offering up Isaac. Now we're down to Isaac. We got to the kid and the grandkids. Now here's his son Isaac all these years later, who has these two sons. He's got Esau and Jacob. And they're the two twins that were born. Esau was born first, Jacob came out second. We're going to spend a lot of time on the back part of this story, but we're going to get there here in just a second. The blessings of Isaac's sons were unique to a point in the Bible. So look over to Genesis chapter 27, because this is where these blessings take place. And you ask yourself, how does blessing those sons, what kind of show of faith is that? Well, it's the way that this blessing goes about. Look back to Genesis chapter 27, starting verse 30. Now, real quick background on this story. I don't want to get bogged down on the story. Most of us here, I think, know this story. You can go back in 26 and 27 and read it, where Jacob and Rebekah have these two sons. They've got Isaac and Rebekah have these two sons. They've got Jacob and they've got Esau. Esau is the firstborn of the twins, so Esau should be in line to get the firstborn's birthright and to be blessed as the firstborn. However, Rebekah loves Jacob. Isaac loves Esau. Isaac is about to die, and he is ready to give his blessing. So he tells Esau to go out and hunt him some wild game, to bring it back, fix him some stew, bring the stew to him, and he will give him his blessing. So Esau heads out into the wild to get the wild game. Jacob, who is at home, who likes to stick around the tents and kind of hang out with his mom, she sees this going on and she tells Jacob, we're going to fix this. I'm going to fix this stew. You're going to take it in. Pretend that you are Esau because your dad's blind. He can't see anymore. And he will give you the first birth blessing. And that's what takes place. And then Esau comes back. But when Esau gets back and he goes into Isaac for his blessing, and he finds out Jacob has sold it, that's where we're going to pick the story up now. Now this is what it is. Now, it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also made a savory food and brought it to his father, and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me. And his father Isaac said to him, who are you? So he said, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. Then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, where is the one who hunted the game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him. And indeed he shall be blessed. In other words, he's got that blessing. He will keep that blessing, and he gets it. And Esau even goes on behind this, and further on in this passage, that is there not a blessing left for me, Father? Can't we reverse this? Can't we turn this around? Now this is a big deal in this culture. The blessing of the Father passing this down to the firstborn. And especially when you're talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, on down through there. This is a very big deal. And Isaac tells him, no, this blessing, the blessing is as the blessing is. Jacob gets this blessing. Now, when you look at this, as unfair as the whole story sounds, it has to be this way to fulfill God's plan. It has to be. If you're still in Genesis, look over at Genesis 25. Go back to Genesis 25, starting in verse 21. Genesis 25, starting in verse 21. Now Isaac pleaded, this is before Rebekah, when they're trying to get pregnant. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea. And Rebekah his wife conceived, but the children struggled together within her. And she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. You know what God just did? God just made a prophecy to Rebekah. You have twins in there. You've got 2 boys in there. They're going to be 2 nations. But the older, the firstborn, is going to serve the younger. Now stick with me here, because the Lord had told Rebekah all those years before that the older would serve the younger. That this blessing would go opposite of what typically takes place. Somewhere along the line, Isaac knew that. Rebekah let Isaac know that. Now, it's not in the scripture, and you can probably say, well, you're reading a lot into that, but somewhere along the line, this was told to Isaac. And Isaac knew this prophecy that Rebekah had received from the Lord, that the older is going to serve the younger. And he realized it at that moment. When Esau came in and said, I'm your firstborn, you've already given my blessing away. In my mind, I'm thinking Isaac has realized this is exactly what Rebekah was talking about. This was God's plan, and I cannot undo God's plan. And by faith, what Isaac did was, that's the blessing that's been given. That's the blessing that's been given, Esau. I'm sorry about that. So, let me ask you this. Now we're going to go down a hole a little bit. Why not just let Jacob be born first? Why did God go through all of this? I mean, God's God. And Rebekah's got the 2 boys in the womb. And God has told her the older will serve the younger. Why? Why not? Why does God do that? Why didn't God just say, well, let's just, Esau, when it comes down to it, he's not a good leader. He would not have been a good leader. So why don't he just let Jacob be born first? And get rid of all of this? Huh? It was a test, was it not? This is what I'm thinking. Here's a whole other test again. You're going to have these 2 sons. You're going to have one that's going to be a firstborn, one that's going to be a secondborn, but the secondborn is going to rule over the firstborn. And that day when all of this has taken place in the tent, when Esau is going out to hunt the game and Rebekah's standing, Rebekah thinks back on this. And she's like, Jacob needs that blessing. God told me Jacob would rule over Esau, and he needs that blessing. And Isaac realized it by the time it all. Does any of this make sense? I don't know. Randall's raising his hand. I might be in trouble now.
I'm with you. But my question is, why use deception and a lie? And I don't have an answer.
No.
Do you?
No, I don't. And I'm telling you, I've struggled with that. I've struggled with Rahab. Yeah.
I think it's just like Sarah. She's trying to fix it. She knew what God had prophesied.
Yes.
So she had to figure out how it was going to happen on its own. So she's like, oh, God needs me to help.
Yeah, God needs me to help him with this. Yeah. So, but I don't know. I can't help you there, Randall. I wish I could.
Esau has already proved to himself
Unworthy.
reliable, and because he sold his birthright for a bowl of stew.
And that's
He was not going to starve to death.
no, and that's what kills me. Is you go back a chapter before the entire thing, and Esau has given up that birthright. And then when this happens, he acts like, well, why? What? This isn't fair. You gave it up. I mean, Esau, before this, he comes in from hunting, and Jacob's there fixing a big pot of stew, and Esau says, give me a bowl of stew, and Jacob says, give me your birthright. And you remember what Esau says? What's a birthright to me? I'm starving to death. He wasn't going to die. He was just like every one of us that's standing there with the refrigerator doors open like this going, there ain't nothing in here to eat. I'm going to starve to death. And it's probably stuffed full. But, you know, he gave up that birthright. He was not going to be, he would not have been the leader that Israel needed to have. And I think God foresaw all of that. And yeah, God could do what God wants to do. He could have made Jacob been born first. He could have not put the tree of good and evil in the garden. The life is filled with tests.
And there's a difference between birthright and blessing as well.
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
the birthright was a general, the firstborn had that birthright. That
Mhm.
was the
Yeah.
general birthright that they had given.
Yeah.
But the blessing was kind of the,
That's a whole spiritual thing that's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think Isaac was tested by God. I think Rebekah was tested by God. I think the whole thing was, you know, yes.
Over in chapter 27, Isaac thinks the whole time that he's blessing Esau.
Yeah.
Because when Jacob first comes in, that's who it is, it's Esau. When you sound like Jacob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He takes the food, yeah, that's what he likes. He said, come here. But he needs to smell the clothes.
Yeah.
Smell
I mean
the
that.
clothes. So it must be Esau. So I'm going to bless him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that's God just working
Yeah.
to working his plan, because he already told him, no, Older's going to serve him.
Yeah.
So he tries to work it out.
He's going to fix it. God's going to fix things the way God fixes things. So.
I think still thinks he's blessing Esau.
Yeah, yeah. So, verse 21, we go down another layer. So we go from Abraham to Isaac, and Isaac blessing Jacob. And now in verse 21, we go down to Jacob. We get down to Abraham's grandson. It says, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. Now, here we go. We're down to Isaac's son Jacob blessing his grandchildren. So, you know the story, all the background of the story. Joseph is one of Jacob's 12 sons, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph has been sold off into slavery as a teenage boy by his brothers who did not like him. They wanted to kill him, but then they decided to make some money on him, so they sold him off to slavery. He gets dragged off to Egypt, where he spends the next couple of decades in Egypt undergoing all kinds of horrible treatment. But then all of a sudden he's discovered by Pharaoh, and he rises to a position of prominence, the second most powerful man in Egypt. And a famine hits, and the brothers have to come to Egypt, and they've got to beg for food. And, you know, we go through the entire thing. Well, Joseph has been living in Egypt. He has taken an Egyptian wife. He has basically nearly become an Egyptian. His brothers don't even recognize him when they come back. But after the story's all said and done, he brings Dad, the family, and everybody else to the land of Goshen in Egypt, where they can live and where they can prosper and where they can do everything. And when Jacob comes to his deathbed, and it's time for him to bid farewell to this life, he calls his sons together, but before he calls them together to give each one of them their blessings, he calls Joseph. And he tells Joseph he's going to give his sons, Joseph's sons, his grandsons, their blessings first. So this is where this takes place, if you hadn't turned over there yet. Genesis chapter 48. Genesis 48, starting in verse 17. Now, what's taken place here? See, I got to give you more explanation real quick. Joseph has brought his two sons. He's brought Manasseh and Ephraim before Jacob. Joseph has brought these sons so that his father can bless his grandchildren. He has positioned his sons where the oldest is to his right and the youngest is to his left. When Jacob gets ready to offer these blessings, he crosses his arms. And he puts his arms on the opposite children. He takes his right arm and puts it on the younger one. His left arm puts it on the older one. And then he offers the blessing. But Joseph notices, and that's where this story starts. Now when Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, who's the younger one, It displeased him, so he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." And so he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will bless, saying, May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Does this sound familiar? we got another set of sons. The younger one's not getting bypassed. He's getting his blessing. But the blessing that comes from the right hand, that's the primary blessing. And when Joseph looks and he tells him, "Listen, you're blessing Ephraim wrong. You got to take that." He actually takes his hand and says, "No, it goes over here." Isaac says, "No, it goes over here." Now here's the thing. We don't have a whole lot going on in there, but we know, a whole lot of the background of exactly why he did that. But I can tell you why he did it. He did it because God had shown him that's what needed to be done. Now we don't have that in the scripture. It doesn't say in there that God came to Isaac and said, or Jacob, and said, "You are to bless Ephraim ahead of Manasseh." But he would not have done it if he hadn't been told to. And that's what he did. And he's listed over in the Faith Hall of Fame for doing it. So he absolutely was doing what God had asked him to do, which went against the norms.
This is kind of a rabbit trail thing. Why would Jacob consider those two sons, Joseph's sons, as his?
If I'm not mistaken, and I'm not over there right now, if you go back further back, when he takes those two, he says they are his sons basically the way he says it, he's replacing two of his sons with those two sons, the way it sounds. And I can't remember which two they were, but they all get listed in the long run. But I think it has to do with going back to the entire betrayal thing and slavery thing, that these guys had came up with this idea that we're going to get rid of Joseph, we're going to kill him, we're going to sell him off. He was gone for all that time. And now Israel, Jacob, is saying, these are really my sons. They're going to take that spot. So I'll do some more research on that and I'll get back with you. All right,
This is carrying the fruit from Ishmael
Mm-hmm.
and Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
Esau,
Yeah.
Jacob, and now
Yeah. You look at it, you've got Abraham, who has his two. One's the son of the promise. You've got Isaac, who's got his two. One of them's going to rule the other one. You've got Joseph, who's got his two. And Jacob has came up and said, this is the one that's receiving the blessing. And we don't have it in the scripture where God told him, you bless Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. But he wouldn't have done it if we didn't have it. And he certainly wouldn't have been listed in the Hebrews book of Hall of Fame if it hadn't been that way. So, and then the back half of the 21st verse. And he worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. This is the end of Jacob's life, and one of the last acts that Jacob does is worships God. And it's significant that he talks about that he does it leaning on the top of his staff. Staffs were very symbolic at that time. And he has had this staff. If you go back in Jacob's life, the first time you see this staff is when he's crossing the Jordan and coming into the land of Canaan. And he's got this staff. And he wrestles with God. And God disconnects his hip. And he walks with a limp from then on. And you can imagine that staff's probably carried him from then on. And there's all kinds of symbolism that you can pull from him worshiping on the head of this staff. That this is God has held me up, God has protected me, God has given me strength, and I'm worshiping God. One of the last things that he does. Is it any wonder that he winds up in the Faith Hall of Fame? because he follows God. He does what God tells him to do. And one of the last things that he does is that he worships God. He's literally on his deathbed when he does this. Yes, sir.
Just popped in my mind, you know, God does things contrary to the social norms.
Mm-hmm.
He's,
All the time.
we worship him today against, quote, the social norms
Mm-hmm.
that would draw us away.
Yeah.
And maybe that's
Just a way of him keeping them unique.
yeah,
Yeah.
showing, hey, this is the way I want you to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't care what society says
Mm-hmm.
or your custom is.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
the way it's going to be.
And all of this is, when it comes right down to it, the blessings and the firstborn and all of that, it was not unique to the Israelites. It wasn't unique to the Jewish people. This was something that was almost every culture back then did it. And you're right. He was making this one definitely unique, you know. So, all right. And then our last verse this evening, by faith, Joseph, now we're all the way down to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So we've got all the way down here to the great-grandsons. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. So if you're still in Genesis, go over to Genesis chapter 50, because this is the story of Joseph getting ready to die. We've seen Abraham getting ready to die. We've seen Isaac getting ready to die. We've seen Jacob getting ready to die. Now we're down to Joseph, and this is Joseph at the end of Joseph's life over in Genesis chapter 50. Genesis chapter 50, starting in the 24th verse. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. So now we get to the end of Joseph's life. He hasn't been in Canaan for, I don't even know how many years. I'd have to go back and look at it. At least 30. It's been a long time since he's been at home. More than that. It's been a way long time. Because he was a teenager when he was captured, and he was 100, and what did he say? What did we say here? 110 when he died? So, you know, he's been in Egypt 80% of his life. And what is it that he says? God is going to come take you all back to Canaan. And when he does, take me with you. That's what he's telling them. And this statement at the end of his life gets him in the Faith Hall of Fame. On his deathbed, Joseph makes this statement of faith. God has made a promise, and he will fulfill it. Did God promise Abraham this section of land where his children would all flourish? Yeah. Yeah, he made a promise to Abraham. You're going to go to this land. You're going to go to the land of Canaan. You're going to fill up this land. Your children are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And this is your land that I will give you, and I will give your descendants. Well, here we are with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Here we are, his great-grandson. And his great-grandson, who has not even been in Canaan since he was a teenager, and now he's over 100 years old, is saying, don't forget, we don't belong here. God made a promise to great-grandpa, and that promise went down to grandpa, and it went down to dad. And I remember that promise, and I'm telling you, God is going to come, and he's going to take you back to our home. And when he does, don't leave me behind. Take me with you. And they do. Joseph's bones get taken all those generations later, whenever Moses comes and leads them out of Egypt and leads them to the promised land. He gets to go with them. So it's going to be hundreds of years before that even takes place. But Joseph has his faith. He said, God promised it. It's going to happen. Because at this point right now, when Joseph's dying, guess what? The Israelites haven't made in Egypt. They're living in the land of Goshen, Everything's good. Joseph is highly respected. His family is highly respected. It's going to be a long time down the road whenever we get over to the book of Exodus when it starts out and it says, and then a Pharaoh comes into power who did not know Joseph. Way down the road. And then he's going to enslave those Israelites. And for generations, they're going to stay enslaved. It's going to be hundreds of years before what Joseph talked about on his deathbed takes place. God will come, and God will take you back to the land that God promised great-grandpa, because God is faithful. And Joseph makes that declaration, and he winds up getting a spot in the Faith Hall of Fame. And one last thing, if that's going to work, one last thing on faith, it can be passed down, can it? I mean, think about it. This whole section here started with Abraham's faith, then his son's faith, then his grandson's faith, then his great-grandson's faith. We can pass that faith down. I mean, faith is a very personal thing, but we can instill it in our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. So, real quick before I wrap this up, anybody got anything else? Any other hard questions that I can say I'll get back with you later on? No? All right. Hebrews 11:17 through 22. God doesn't tempt, but he will test. He tested Abraham. Faith knows God can do the impossible. Abraham knew, I take him up there, if I have to kill him, God will give him back to me. Faith sticks to God's plan. Jacob and Esau, God had a plan. Jacob was going to rule over Esau one way or another. Faith can carry you to the very end. The last thing Jacob does on his deathbed is leans on his staff and worships the Lord. Faith never forgets God's promises. Joseph is a great-grandson of Abraham, and he says, don't forget what God promised great-grandpa, and he promised grandpa, and he promised dad. That promise is still good. He's going to come back. He's going to take you all home. God's promises always stick, and faith never forgets them. And faith can be passed down. It went from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph. And that's all I got. Anybody got anything else? Because the next slide's a song and Craig wants to sing. Anybody?
So the song,
Huh?
so the song, "To Canaan's Land, I'm on my way," was really about
What? Yeah, it's all the way back to Canaan's land. I mean, they were heading to Canaan's land, we're heading to Canaan's land. Easter egg! You know, what was Canaan symbolic of? What's the Jordan symbolic of? We're going to cross the river. We're going to go to the other side. We're going to live in the promised land. We're going to be there for eternity. God has promised it. And it took generations for it to happen physically for the Israelites. It takes us our lifetime to happen, and it's going to happen spiritually when we walk out of this life. So, there you go. So, with that, that's a good place to wrap that up, is that we're all going to walk out of this life eventually. The question is, where are we going to go? Are you going to cross over into Canaan's land or go somewhere else that you probably don't want to be? The answer to that is, if you're going to cross over into Canaan's land, you got to give yourself to Jesus Christ.